Welcome back to the Community Meta podcast. I'm Mighty, and over that side, I think it is Morg, unless we're doing some magic video editing later. So today, we are going to pretty much follow what we've more or less segued really quickly from our last one onto the concept of problems that communities can run into over time as they might gradually turn toxic. So to speak. So there might be a situation where you've got a new community that's all after the fire has sort of the initial excitement and the honeymoon period has sort of started to peter off, and people are starting to wonder like, hey, are we actually going to be here for, are we here for a long time, not just a good time? Wink. Then they go into that sort of process of figuring out who they want to be collectively. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, are we friends or
Are
have
we
we
friends or
just been?
Yeah, or are we internet co-workers
Yeah,
in a video game? So there's a theory that was put forward for a lot of like team building stuff that's been floating around for a couple of decades, and it's these sort of concept of how groups go through this process when they first form. And the idea is that it's got 4 stages. So you have forming, norming, storming. No, other way around. Forming, storming, norming, and then performing. And those 4 stages more or less come. They're mostly self-explanatory. You've got forming, which is when the group first comes together. You start to meet everybody. You know how you put on your best face when you meet new people because you don't want them to think that you're the worst thing ever. That's your forming stage where everyone's kind of getting to know each other. Then you've got storming, which is after that sort of phase of getting to know everyone is over. You need to start having little bits of conflict here and there to sort of establish, like, get it out of the system, if that makes sense. So you can kind of figure out exactly where everybody's going to shake down, which then leads on to your norming stage, which is when people start to sort of settle into the roles that they've got within the community or the team or what have you. And then after that, you have the performing one, which is once everybody's figured all of that sort of stuff out, they can then start to focus on their individual role within the team, and they can start going like, and then that's when it goes to the moon, baby. It's all stonks all the way down.
in failure to do that, you then go on to the 5 stages of grief.
Exactly. Yeah. So basically, so the issue there is that all of these things take time, more or less, and it can take different amounts of time for different groups depending on how proactive they are about navigating this process. So you can have ones where you might get together. It's like it happens a lot with sort of esports teams where they'll get together, they'll have a lot of immediate success because it's all fresh, new, exciting, it's working, and then they hit their first wall. And at that point, they have to start making this decision, like, are we going to stick together through this hard times to try to overcome it together and get better? Or am I just going to find a new team? And that's kind of like your storming point, right? Most teams, groups, communities, they end at the storming point because there is a kind of people generally don't care for conflict, and the people who aren't necessarily afraid of conflict might get too invested in conflict, if that makes sense. So I feel like you sort of have to be able to appreciate that, like, it's got to happen so that everybody can get better, but it has to be almost like not personal, and it's really hard to not make it personal.
So would you say this is the part of the process where people generally have unspoken expectations, differing expectations that don't sort of meet each other?
Yeah, exactly. Like around like we were talking about you got your forming, your storming. The storming is where that sort of starts to come out, right? Like that's where you have those arguments where it's like, oh, how come you didn't do this? And it's like, well, you never told me to do this. Why didn't you tell me to do this? And that's like a very common thing when you're trying to do any of that sort of team building or guidance or anything like that, is sort of there's this expectation that everything should just be perfect straight away and everything should just be the way that I think it should be, without having to go through the process of actually communicating what those expectations are, which is when you start getting the And that's when people start to get invested in the conflicts, right? They're like, well, how come this guy didn't tell me this, and how come this guy didn't tell me this, or vice versa, and it starts to get it starts to get real reality television up in there in some discords.
I've been solo queuing for 5 hours just to improve. This guy's just showing up to training and nothing else.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like, I think it's one of those ones where even stuff like that, or like, what if this guy, he is really good by himself, so he might not necessarily be able to get as much out from just solo queuing, but you still need them to turn up to a practice sort of thing. It's like it's very common in Dota, for example, like people who play position 4 or 5. Those particular roles are so important with regards to how well you interact with the rest of the team that it is really difficult to get good value practice out of just random solo queuing. Like, you need to be able to play scrims or in-houses or, like focused practice sort of sessions, because you might not necessarily get a lot of once you get to that level, you might be able to plateau, and you might not get as much usable experience out of just random matchmaking anymore.
Yeah, I feel like the solution to this with expectations is all just communication. Like, that's a real simple one.
Yeah.
Just having a time after sort of the honeymoon periods ended, and you generally want to do it before problems arise, but just having that dedicated chat where everyone sort of sets the expectations together in a shared environment. Since everyone's
exactly.
putting their own opinion in, they will all have buy-in in that situation. Therefore, they're more likely to adhere to those expectations.
Yeah, because otherwise, if you don't do that, then you start to get people start to churn, right? Like, you'll have the phrase for World of Warcraft used to be like guilds die at night, right? Because people just they'll go, oh, this guild's falling apart, so I'm just going to leave at like 2 a.m. in the morning so no one sees me on the way out. And if you're lucky, people don't notice that you're gone.
Or if you're unlucky, I guess.
Yeah,
Pretty
exactly.
sad.
Yeah, depending on how much you want to be loved by other people on the internet.
I mean, that's the reason I get up at night.
Yeah, well, you got to wake up early in the day, so you got more time to be loved on the internet. Oh dear. So you end up with that sort of stuff going on, and I think the communication skills is a really interesting sort of point, because games don't really teach you proper communication skills or goal setting or anything like that. They just kind of give you, especially a lot of the team-based games, they're not really good at, they do their best in some cases. It'll be like tooltips that'll say like, hey, if you're nice to people, you might get invited back to their groups. Like, like, it's not rocket surgery, but it's kind of sad that that's got to be a tooltip on a video game rather than like press F to give ammo or whatever the case may be. Press Y to develop meaningful lifelong social relationships.
Yeah. It's not really working on my keyboard. I'm clicking it right now.
That's okay. You haven't got the patch yet. You have to wait you have to be on the PTS for that one.
Makes sense.
So
I guess video games just have this basic. They will assume that people know how to communicate, which doesn't happen all the time. Like, doesn't necessarily mean that someone does know how to communicate well within a team all the time, but there's a basic level that someone playing this game, especially if it's 15 plus, is they have some level of teamwork / communication skills.
Yeah. And I think that the other wild thing is that different teams will have different standards of communications as well. If you follow any of the like the Apex Legends, their pro season, they do a lot of like the commentators will tag into a particular team's comms for for like half a minute or so, and it's so wildly different between different teams, like how they communicate with each other. Like, some it'll be one guy calling the shots over and over again, others it'll be like silent for most of the time, and then they'll just mention one or two things, which is, like, different teams want things to work differently for the individuals in the group. You know, some teams might want a strong leader who can sort of say, right, I need this, I need this, I need this. He's like the playmaker and
The big brainer.
the big brainer, and everybody can kind of come together to follow that. But you also get other teams where they just kind of want to be able to focus on your personal thing, and you hopefully find a couple of other people whose personal styles sort of slot in together fairly naturally, and it kind of just like it just works, you know. And personally, I think that second one is it's a really nice goal, but I think it takes a very, very, very long time for a group of people to get to that level. And it also takes like conscious effort to make sure that you can get to that level. Like you have to go through a lot of pitfalls so that you can have the necessary learning experiences so that you don't need to talk over things over and over again because you've been there, done that.
Yeah, you need a high level of trust within that team, because you just automatically need to assume that this person's going to do their job,
Yeah.
and you don't have to micromanage them. You can just call what you
Yeah.
need to call and trust that they do with that information that they need to do.
Yeah. But then some teams, they might need you to be able to go, okay, I need to be able to give you a task, and I know that you will do the task, but you won't hyper focus on the task. You will still be able to work that task into your process, as opposed to just being like, you know, as we were saying before, like, oh, why didn't you just do this thing? And it's like, well, you know, they might have had a lot of other stuff going on, or for whatever reason. But it's like you say, it is important to get that sort of communication down so that everyone can be on the same page, basically. So, because once everything stops happening, things start getting a little bit, to say a popular word on the internet, a little bit toxic,
A bit salty.
a little bit salty, a little bit toxic. You know, it's fine. So I find that like the phrase toxic's kind of kicked off in the last, say, like 10 or so years. I think it really sort of started when League of Legends did a lot of work in the early days trying to like combat what they called toxicity, which was kind of weird because it's almost turned into this word that people have learned that generally means this concept of something disagreeable. And so they might just say, oh, it's toxic, when they mean that they don't agree with it. Like it might, you know, like this guy's out here, he's not eating babies, he just bought the wrong item in lane. Like, you know, it could honestly be just an honest mistake. And I know MOBAs have a pretty bad rap for it. I know like your Dotas, your League of Legends, stuff like that used to have it pretty bad. Before them, it was Counter-Strike, like the old Counter-Strike, like very old Counter-Strike community had a pretty bad reputation for a while. But ultimately, I think every game's gonna have it. You know, like it's just
It's
just
just the
there.
nature of online games these days.
Yeah.
Uh,
And most of them do have some measure of ways to try to combat it for you as a user. For example, like a lot of them have got the mute and the ignore functions and the report buttons and things like that. It obviously is a pain in the butt that it happens in the first place, but you know, like it's nice to think that the internet is this enlightened place of smart people, but I think that knowing that like upper levels of academia can get pretty spicy, and that's at universities and stuff like that, with, you know, like super duper multiple decades levels professors and things like that. I mean, if you know, what hope have we got, right?
yeah,
So
exactly. It's sort
yeah.
of built into human nature of not sort of agreeing with everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So I think that, but it is a bit of a, you do get put into a bit of a bind though. So you've got these options for like mute, ignore, stuff like that. But a lot of the times these options are available in team games. And so you have to sort of figure out what your personal threshold of signal to noise ratio is before you block someone off, right? Like, you know, I don't like the idea of muting everybody on my team before I've ever spoken to them, if I can avoid it. But I can certainly understand people trying and trying and trying and just eventually getting burned to the point where they just do it out of instinct because that's the Um, that's the
Right.
reality of it, you know?
At some level, they know they just can't face another toxic person at that point in
Yeah.
time, that they just need to safeguard themselves so they can go and enjoy a video game.
Yeah, which which is kind of the while you're stuck in solo queue, it's worth trying to find a community that works for you so that you can sort of disconnect from that. But that then, like we were saying last week, comes into like it's the extra effort. You have to spend this extra time to find people that you can, at the very least, tolerate. Dare I say, you might even enjoy their company over time.
Ugh,
Um,
gross.
and and then you can get to the point where you can actually sort of engage with the gameplay. Like I think that trying to play games, I say competitively, not necessarily in the pro sense, but at least two teams who are there to give it their best shot and do the best that they can with the tools that the game gives them is where a lot of the games are really fun. But it can be hard to create that experience without significant effort. Just because you might get someone, he's just there, he's just got home from work, man. He just wants to click on heads.
Yeah.
Like
Uh,
Hanzo
the,
all
the,
day, every day, baby.
I guess the other difference is you sometimes that toxicity you can't just mute away. So if you think of like Counter Strike, you can mute your entire team, but if they catch on that, or you're just not listening to them, you're playing your own game, they may come in like just start crouching in front of you when you're trying to just play the
Yeah.
game and trying to get you to
Yeah,
team
you
kill
get
them.
like the griefing stuff going on, which is it's always wild. Like imagine being so tilted that you basically like go that far out of your way.
You're
To
tanking
like
your own team.
yeah, exactly. He sunk the ship. He sunk the ship he was working on just to kill the captain, you know? Yeah. It's crazy that sort of stuff can happen. But I think that one of the things that happened as a result of the like that sort of efforts that Riot put in the early sort of days is it kind of feels like the actual phrase toxic has kind of become this word that you've heard maybe from your therapist, or a friend went to a therapist and used the phrase a lot, and so it kind of gets like misused a little bit here and there. But like I don't know if you ever saw back in those days, they had like a submission forum where people could like request to be unbanned, and some of that stuff was so funny to watch, where someone will post a thing like, oh, like I got banned, and like, hey, it must be a mistake, I've got a good behavior score, all this sort of jazz. And then the moderators come in and they'll post the actual chat logs that got this guy banned. And it's like, okay, so I may have used a few racial slurs, but what would you do in that situation when your lane partner is, like doing this thing? It's obviously that justifies this, right? I mean, he left clicked a little bit to the right of where he should have. Can you believe that? Like,
And then they just start arguing
and
in
yeah, then
chat
they
with the moderator.
backpedal.
Yeah.
Yeah, they like backpedal. They're like, oh yeah. Oh, I see. That's what I was doing that was bad. Oh, and it's like, mate.
Yeah, come on. No need for
Yeah.
that behavior. You're not getting them banned.
Exactly. So a lot of this sort of stuff can, like we were saying, in like a smaller, more focused community, as I think we've spoken before a few times how a lot of the gaming sort of communities can kind of be a little bit analogous to a volunteer organization, right? Like it's like we're doing in our spare time and we're not getting paid for it. So ideally we'd be doing it for fun. And it sort of leads to this thing where like moderation, I wouldn't necessarily say that moderation is in and of itself a fun task to do. It weirds me out seeing people on like Twitch streams being like, oh yeah, give me mod. I'm like, why? I don't want to give you a job in your spare time. Like you're here for a good time, mate. Like, and
Like the other hand of that is they want a nice positive Twitch experience whilst watching their favorite streamer.
that's true. That's true. If they are willing to put the effort in, I think that is also quite important. And it can kind of gets into this sort of weird thing, right, where you have like people will come in and they want to, moderate and things like that. But then even then, you might have this danger of people have different standards of what's acceptable. Like the streamer themselves might be like a little on the fence about something, where someone else might be really heavy-handed. And it's important that, we were talking about the communicating your expectations. It's the same thing where you got to make sure that the people who are there to be like moderators are more of like a support network for the actual streamer, so that they don't have to do the work. And it is important that they're all kind of working from, ideally, one would think, the streamer's perspective, sort of thing. Because otherwise it's like a middle manager coming in and trying to take over like from the top, you know.
Yeah.
Like you sort of you're pushing too hard in the wrong direction, and it would be better for them to just form their own community rather than
Trying to
sort of.
steal someone's community and
I think
start enforcing.
yeah, like I
I
think
steal's probably the wrong word.
yes, steal might be the wrong. I think it's one of those unspoken ones, right? Like unless you actually talk about those sort of expectations, you might get someone in who feels very strongly about something, and then their streamer or like fellow moderators might feel differently on it. And it's important that everyone comes at that from a team, and that you don't have like this one mod go on a massive tear. I've seen that a few times where like there might be an issue that everybody kind of sort of passes the buck around, and then the guy who actually does something about it gets in trouble because he didn't consult everybody else about, and it's like, oh no. You know, it's not.
Yeah, you hate to see that.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's not great, but I can understand how it happens as well. And at the end of the day, like it does solve the, you know, sometimes you need a Rambo who can just like do the thing, and then it's like,
Yeah,
what's the phrase? It's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, right? Well, sometimes maybe.
but I always like the phrase, uh, if you want to kill an idea, form a committee.
It's a good one. I like that
Because
one.
if everyone needs to put their opinion onto something,
Mm,
and then the committee can't decide on the idea, which most of the time sort of happens.
yeah,
Or the person who originally had the idea brings it to the committee, goes around the committee, and then it's no longer their idea, their baby,
yeah.
but they're the ones still expected to implement that idea, which
Oh
is
yeah,
now
yeah.
being
It's like, hey, I've
chopped
got this
and
great
changed.
idea. Yeah, yeah. I can see that. So it's like someone comes and goes, "Hey, I got a great idea," and then like as it goes around the committee, it's like, "Good, but do this. Good, but do this.
Yeah.
Good, but
So,
do
so
this.
as an
Good, but do
example,
this," and
uh,
then you're left with like maybe 30 to 40% of what you originally wanted, and it's
yeah,
like,
like a weird example would be, yeah, I want to run a games night, Gary's mod prop hunt, and then it goes to committee, and then it turns into a Counter Strike games night, 5v5, and you're left holding that, and you're like, I don't want to run this.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think it's the whole volunteer organization thing, right? Like eventually, and so we were talking a little bit about the moderation as well. So getting the right people in the right roles can be difficult for that, and especially with what happens with a lot of volunteer organizations, is that people will join a volunteer organization and they'll rise relatively quickly, so to speak, because volunteer organizations do tend to churn pretty regularly, and people just being around and knowing the lay of the land kind of naturally float up. But it's very easy to get like Peter principled in those sort of situations, so that you'll end up in a position that's like maybe a step above where your competency lies, and so you might be really good at like in-game leadership, but you're not necessarily that keen on, you know, like trying to find people to play a game or like networking and stuff like that. So you sort of want to make sure that you're in like the middle ground between those two, because then the further up you go, the further away you get pulled from the thing that you really enjoy doing. And I think in a lot of cases that can kind of
I think it
be a
leads
bit
to
of a
burnout.
buzzkill. Yeah, well, I've seen that with some like amateur esports groups as well. Like people really enjoy casting, for example, and they really love casting, but they don't want to be involved with finding the players, finding the game, making the organizing a time, making sure that there's observers, making sure that OBS works, all this sort of stuff. They just want to look at pixels move and use their words. You know, and in some cases it can be you know, in some cases, to get the practice that you want for that, you have to go through that process, and it can
Yeah.
sometimes be like, you know, is this the thing that I have to do so that I can do the thing that I love?
And then the problem with sort of that in a gaming community is they head up the ladder in those role positions, and once they decide, no, I don't want to do this role anymore, they don't go back down. They just leave the community onto the next thing.
Exactly. And unless of course a community is like robust and well established enough to be able to handle leadership changes like that.
Yeah, but it's sort of sad that because of that burnout that they no longer enjoy that community anymore. Even though they
Yeah.
loved it so much that they wanted to volunteer their time doing work
Yeah.
associated stuff with it, and they've just gone on to something new or just um, left like communities in general for a little bit just to get back in that headspace of video games are for fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think it's very easy to sort of burn yourself out when you're enjoying yourself, but then afterwards it's like you almost have to be able to take care of yourself whilst you're in the process of doing it. Otherwise, you might just teach yourself to hate something that you really enjoy doing, and that's quite tragic.
Yeah.
So I think that's more or less. I can't think of much else on that sort of topic with the toxicity stuff, unless we're going to start, like just going over specific instances from our lives. But I think that's a topic that can just last forever. That could be a story time. Hey, viewers, let's
If you
start a
subscribe to
story
our
time.
Patreon,
If you subscribe to our Patreon and then tell us your worst experiences with gaming for hashtag content. Yeah. So I think that's about most that we've got
yeah,
for this week. Unless is that you guys happy with that?
yeah,
Um,
yeah, we started with
yeah, a
that.
little bit. Okay. Oh, I actually know. I know a way to do this one. Yeah. So when it comes to setting expectations, it can also go over like a goal setting thing. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, you were taught in school about setting what they call SMART goals, right? SMART. It's an acronym. Oh boy, we love this
Oh,
learning business, which basically stands for it's your goals need to be specific, right? They've got to be measurable. They have to be achievable. And they need to be realistic, and they should also be time bound so that at some point you can reflect to tell if you have actually achieved your goal. Now, it's okay to set a goal, and even if you give it a good effort and you fail, that is still a learning experience that you can use to come forward, right? So then next time you might set a better goal and you'll achieve it, or you might have found out in the process of working towards this goal that you actually have to achieve a couple of others to enable it, sort of thing. And it's important to have that sort of thing can really help with measuring your expectations as well. The other thing that a lot of communities tend to do is like a code of conduct. Hey, here's what we expect of the people in the community. You can see it in pretty much every Discord, every streamer nowadays. Before you can actually chat in the chat, you have the little list of rules. The unfortunate thing with like rules is that people who aren't going to follow them aren't gonna read them. But
what?
I know, right? But the other side of that coin is that if you have a rule, you have to enforce it, because if you have a clear example of an unenforced rule going on in your community, then it what's the point, right? And it can kind of erode that uh, trust that you would have for
Yeah,
everybody if there's a fairly clear example of a rule going unenforced. For example, people start going, oh well, this one doesn't care, so
just
if that one
clearly,
doesn't care, yeah, like, and if that one doesn't care, does this one really care? um so then you have to sort of go, right, well, if we need to have the rules, we also need people willing to enforce the rules. But then you have to be careful about how you write them, because it sort of goes, are you enforcing the spirit of the rule versus are you enforcing the letter of the rule? And it starts all getting very
yeah,
very
it's harder
interpretive.
and harder setting those expectations within the
Yeah.
community.
And sometimes, I don't know if you do this too, but sometimes it's quite funny joining a Discord and looking at the list of rules. And sometimes they'll have really specific ones, and you're like, I really want to know what event happened that made them make this a rule. And every community is going to have them. And it's kind of like, it's like, okay, so it's almost like archaeology, right? Like a social archaeology. You're sort of going, okay, so what happened that pissed these people off so much that they specifically said we are not having any of this anymore?
I can actually read one of these rules out from one of my Discords.
Oh, yes, lay it on me if that's okay.
So rule 1.2 in this Discord is TikTok is now a banned platform. Any posting you're talking about TikToks will have your content deleted.
Of your own TikTok or any TikTok?
Any TikTok.
Oh, see, and so is that just because people were spamming it? Or is it because the people running the Discord have a specific bug with TikTok? Because there are very legitimate reasons to have those.
I think there was a specific community member that just kept posting their own TikToks.
Oh, yeah.
And people just got sick of watching them that they just banned all TikToks.
Oh, that's kind of a little tragic, right? It's like the few spoiling it for the many. Like, oh no, look at this. Here's an 80, here's a non-watermarked 40-second vertical GIF that's completely unrelated, right? Oh, look, it's got some licensed music in the background that I'm lip syncing to. It's fine. It's not on TikTok, right? Wink.
Everything is good. Everything is fine.
and then there's that, right? Like, what if you have people like then you get people trying to like weasel around it? Oh, it's a never-ending job, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that point about having those rules that just seem so specific that something must have happened to cause them.
Yeah, but I mean that's how and like the longer-standing communities will have a larger list of those, and because eventually, as a community gets larger and larger, it's all well and good to sort of say, oh, we'll do everything on a case-by-case basis, right? I mean that works when a community is small enough that everybody can get involved with that sort of process. But once it starts getting larger and larger and larger, like, sometimes you have to be able to tell people, hey, like, guys, we got to pull our socks up here.
Yeah,
but people also need to be able to go, that's fair. My socks were pretty low.
Like those like ankle cuts.
Oh, baby, I could see an entire ankle there.
But yeah, rules should be specific enough that everyone has a clear expectation of what's expected, both on the moderator side of people enforcing them, so they're not enforcing their own rules.
Yeah.
And for the community side to go, okay, this is what's acceptable and which this isn't. This is what's not acceptable.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's worth a lot of communities kind of after their first little bit where they all get together and stuff like that. It's important to try to like check in as well, like every so often. I know there's a couple that do like weekly or monthly or however many meetings so that everybody can check in with each other and see, hey, here's where we're at. Here's what we're working on. Is there anything from this last period that we need to, have a sit down and have a think and a talk about? I think that without that sort of reflection, you also won't get the ability to move forward because you're likely to just get stuck doing the same stuff over and over again.
100%.
All right.
So I think that's everything for today.
Yeah, now that's everything for today. We did it, team.
Thank you for tuning in to the community meta. I've been Morg, and I've been joined by Mighty. And we hope to see you next time. And in the interim, I hope you enjoy finding your tribe out there.
That's right. Have a good night, or day, or week, or whatever.
Or year.
Or year, whatever. Just pick a unit of time and enjoy it.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. Have you clicked the subscribe button yet? Have you given us a thumbs up and maybe commented on the video too? Have you done that yet? Have you done it? Oh, cheers. Thanks.